Good evening, and welcome to the Library of Virginia. It is my great pleasure to have you here for the second event in our 2024 Carol Weinstein Author Series. My name is Dennis Clark, and I am the still very new Librarian of Virginia. This evening's guest is none other than Senator Tim Kaine, who will be discussing his experiences around the Commonwealth as he relates in his book, Walk, Ride, Paddle, A Life Outside. I'd also like to thank anybody who had originally registered for this event several weeks ago. As most of you know, the work of Congress was very important and required Senator Kaine's presence. We are just very delighted that we were able to reschedule it so quickly. And before we begin, I'd like to make a few notes about this evening's program. First, Ann Holton told me she would be angry with me if I did not acknowledge Sandy Treadway in the audience. Sandy Treadway, yes, absolutely. And her husband, John Kuklo. As many of you know, Sandy Treadway is Librarian of Virginia Emerita, and we are so pleased always to see her back in the building. So welcome, Sandy. And she's very angry with me that I did that. First, our program is made possible thanks to the generous support through the Carol Weinstein Endowment for Virginia Authors at the Library of Virginia Foundation. We are so very grateful for the support from Carol and Marcus Weinstein and for not only this event, but from the library in the past. So thank you both very, very much. If you would also like to support the library, we have ways for you to do that as well. You can visit the information table in the lobby and for more information, or you can always go to our website. Members of the foundation staff are here if you have any questions about how you might best support the library, so please feel free to connect with those folks. Senator Kaine will be signing copies of his book in the lobby after tonight. If you do not have yours, do not despair. There are copies in the Virginia shop right across the lobby, and that shop is open, so you can pick up a copy to have that signed after the event. I'd also like to encourage you to join us on May 15th for the next in the Carol Weinstein Author Series event, when the Poetry Society of Virginia will be reading and discussing works from the Centennial Anniversary Anthology. And lastly, there will be a question and answer at the end of tonight's program. If you have a card that you received when you came in and you have a question that you would like to pose to Senator Kaine, please pass that toward this direction at the end of the row, and we'll pick those up so we can have those ready to moderate at the end of the discussion tonight. And with that, let me welcome Carol Weinstein to introduce tonight's author.
5 years ago, in 2019, Tim Kaine chronicled both his 60th birthday and his 25 years in public service. First as Richmond City Council member, then as mayor of Richmond, then as lieutenant governor of Virginia, then as governor of Virginia, and now as the United States Senator for the last 12 years. And incidentally, some of you remember, he was a vice presidential candidate in 2016. And oh, how I wish we could go back and do that over again. Yeah. Well, I traveled vicariously with Senator Kaine, a total of 1,200 miles. I was with him all the way. I walked the Appalachian Trail, 550 miles. I biked 320 miles along the Blue Ridge Parkway. And I paddled a canoe for 350 miles along the James River from the Allegheny Mountains to the Chesapeake Bay, all the while listening as he reflects on his deep love for the natural world, as he reveals his inner thoughts and shares his political observations in these monumental times. It's a must-read. Truly, I listened because I love to hear Tim read in his own voice, so that made it more special for me even. But if you buy the book, you get the added value of photos from his childhood onward. I'm doubly happy tonight because he's here with his wife, Ann Holton, who's well-known in the public eye in her own right, because she, their children, and many of his longtime friends joined him on various portions of his journey. As you can see, they're sitting together to dialogue about this Virginia nature quest. Take it away.
So yes, I get the very first word, but not the last word, I assure you. And what a treat to be here. Thank you, Carol and Dennis, for getting us off to a great start. And thank you for this very friendly hometown crowd. It's great to be with you all. I'm going to get us started by asking Tim to read the prologue, which is short, but I think it helps sets up the book well. So will you start us with that?
I will. And again, to Dennis and Carol, thank you. And to all of you, thank you so much for coming tonight. Thanks some of you for trying to come 2 weeks ago and persisting. So I'll just read the first page and a half. Prologue 2023. This book is an account of 3 journeys I undertook deep into Virginia nature from May 2019 through October 2021. I planned the multi-year experience in 2018 to commemorate turning 60 and reaching 25 years in public life. What I didn't know when I hatched the plan was that the adventure would coincide with 2 impeachment trials, a pandemic killing more than 1 million people in the United States and causing global economic meltdown, a violent attack on the Capitol with the intent to overturn the 2020 presidential election, and racial justice protests sparked by the murder of George Floyd and others. As a center, I was in the middle of all of it. I kept a journal each of the 76 days I was hiking, cycling, and canoeing across Virginia. Afterward, I added notes on each trip and planned the next portion. Each chapter is about the day's journey, the history, both human and natural, of the places I traversed, conversations with companions and passersby, memories of earlier trips, and thoughts occurring to me along the way. The journal became an organic reflection of the extraordinary events occurring in America during the years of the journey. That daily turmoil filled my thoughts and came to play a larger part in the narrative than I would have predicted when I began. But the time in Virginia's wilderness also proved a balm for the chaos I was living. Along the way, I've learned much about Virginia, America, nature, other people, and myself. I've resisted the temptation to revise sections of the journal based on what I now know about how these events played out. Instead, this is a real-time reflection of how I experienced these events with only the knowledge I had at the moment, never sure what I would see around the next bend. Even now, more than at any time in my life, I'm not sure what I will see around the next bend.
All right. Well, I'm going to jump right in and with an easy question, but I hope a fun one. I know it's easy because I gave it to him ahead of time for this one. But that is, did you bring us some show and tell? And would you like to share it now and tell folks about it?
So who's hiked on the Appalachian Trail? So, right, okay, almost everyone has hiked at least some. If you're a long-distance hiker on the Appalachian Trail, you know that you go by a trail name. You don't introduce yourself by your real name. There's sort of a democratizing element to wearing hiking shorts, smelling bad, and having a trail name. But the rule about trail names is that you can't pick your own. A trail name has to be given to you. So when I started hiking the AT in Harper's Ferry in May of 2019, hiking south to Tennessee, I would introduce myself as TK. But then at one point along the way, a person who was hiking with me, who happens to be in this room, saw me using this. This is a collapsible dog bowl that at the end of a hike each day, I would fill it with water, put some Dr. Bronner soap in it, and then wash my face and then my socks. In that order, not the reverse order.
There was no dog involved.
Yes, this was my dog bowl. My friend Ned thought it was cool the first day and then thought I was too proud of it the second day and then called me Dog Bowl. And our dog had died not long before the hike, and her dog bowl, Gina's dog bowl, is still sitting on the floor next to our kitchen table, kind of as a little memorial. So I thought, dog bowl, that's a good name. So that's my show and tell. I met Choo Choo, Magic, Tracker, Underdog, Red Bush, Cotton, Pac-Man. One day I did meet a guy named Achilles, and I said, great trail name, and he said, what do you mean trail name? That was his actual name. I can't imagine a mother, bestowing Achilles, but that would have been a good trail name.
As you know, our family started camping and hiking and canoeing, though that was mostly the guys and kids when our kids were very young. And we did it in lots of different ways: car camping, backpacking, day hiking, staying at great state parks, sometimes in tents, sometimes in cabins. Any suggestions for folks here who might be just, and I guess, but how many hands raised on already hiked portions of the AT? Maybe there aren't too many people here, but people here or their friends who are just starting on outdoor adventuring, either up for themselves or with their families. Any suggestions on where to go or what to do?
Yeah, great. And I got to say, since Annie Oakley, she's the best outdoors woman that has walked this earth. My wife is an amazing outdoors person, and when we met in law school, one of the things that so immediately drew me to her was she loved being outdoors every bit as much as I did. And all of our kids were in tents by 6 months old, and many of my neighborhood friends and others who I've camped with are here in the room. They're as different as can be, the three of them, but they still will drop everything to go camping or do outdoor stuff. So yeah, what's the way to get started if you have little ones? Start really early. Start before the kids will wander away from the campground in the middle of the night. But start before they're mobile, and they'll develop a real passion for it. The Virginia State Park system is fantastic because the parks are everywhere. They're really wonderful. Some are really great for RVs. Others are better for tent camping. Some have canoe in. You can canoe into James River State Park up near kind of toward Lynchburg on Route 60, or canoe into Powhatan State Park just west of here. There's canoe-in campgrounds that are great. But I'd say just start early and just do a little bit. The first time that I persuaded my parents to take me camping, I tell the story in the book. I'd been in Boy Scouts, and then I had a shop teacher in middle school who got me really into it. And then I had to persuade my parents, take my two brothers, younger brothers, and I camping. And okay, we'll go away for 2 nights. And it was a disaster. It was like before Chevy Chase, it was a disaster. Everything went wrong. The tent wouldn't go up. My brother got a cut and needed stitches. The food fell off the Coleman stove into the dirt, and we didn't get to have dinner. There was a tornado warning. But we weren't back for 2 days before the boys were like, Mom and Dad, when are we going camping again? Never. So I would say if you start it early and just simple, and a state park is the perfect thing, because not only are there campsites, but there'll be playgrounds and trails and beautiful birds. That would be my advice. Take advantage of the Virginia State Park system.
Yes, and we have taken advantage. We should have one of those charts where we put a pin in every state park, because there's some that we haven't.
Do you have a good memory about like a disastrous one with our kids? I told about disastrous one with my parents.
Well, I guess I can. The statute of limitations has run on this, so I can tell the time when we were at Douthat with friends again who are in the audience, and Anella was less than a year old, just under a year old, had a bit of a cold, and anyway, somehow she's asleep in the tent, we think, while the adults are all sitting around the campfire enjoying ourselves in various ways. And long story short, Anella got into the cough syrup in the tent. And we're, going back, how much was in the bottle? Do we need to race into the nearest hospital? Is she okay? And she slept well that night.
So much for childproof calf,
yeah. All right, so here's a question that the answer is not in the book, but and I know a little bit of it because I've been along for the ride. But one of the things that's been fun for you and me both about this is getting to know the publishing industry, which neither of us had ever been on this side of that enterprise at all before, and it's just been fascinating. Can you share with them? With the audience, some of what's been surprising or interesting about the process of taking your work to market.
Ann and I both love books. In fact, a lot of her book club members are here, and everybody who is here at the Library of Virginia loves books. but you can love books but know nothing about books, and that's who I was, when I started this. So I did these days, I'd keep 100 words, I would turn it into a journal, then I ended up with this big manuscript. Well, what do I do with this now? I didn't have an agent, I didn't have a publisher. What do I do with this now? I went to 2 agents who had done work for Senate friends of mine. Senators write books. And they both said, we like this, but it just doesn't fit. It doesn't fit. It's not all journal, or travel, it's not all politics, it's not all autobiography. There's stuff about marriage and relationships and family. It doesn't really fit anywhere. And so 2 turned me down, even though they said some, relatively, complimentary things just to appease me, I guess. But then I'm really lucky. You guys know at the Library of Virginia, the writer Adriana Trigiani has been a real key part of this place. And Anne and Adri were connected along with the Trigiani sisters, 2 of whom are here from Big Stone Gap. Anne would go there for the summer to visit her paternal grandparents, and the Trigiani family was there. And so I sent the manuscript to Adri, and I said, I think this is kind of good, but be honest with me. And she read it, and she said, I'll give it to my agent. And I thought, well, you kind of write, your books are a little different than this. And I said that to her. I said, you're writing novels and, kind of modern adult romantic and historical novels. This is very different. She goes, agents don't like to specialize. Editors will specialize. And maybe publishers will specialize. But agents kind of like good writing, and they kind of like it if they have a novelist and a nonfiction writer. So she sent it to Suzanne Gluck at WME, and Suzanne read it and said, I've never done anything with anybody in politics, but I like it, I'll do it. So then, finding an agent, then finding a publisher, and then working with an editor, and then doing an audio book. And then Joseph works with Harper's as an independent contractor. He's a Richmonder, and he's been the marketing guy. Everywhere along the way, it's been a surprise.
Including there was a strike that influenced
yes.
you? Yes. Right?
Writing a book has been on my bucket list. And when Suzanne went to Harper's and they said, we'll offer you a contract, I'm about to be a writer. And the Harper's workforce went on strike. I don't think I was at fault. I'm not saying it was about me, but they went on strike. And the word from this part of the Harper's workforce is don't cross the picket line. If you have a contract, go ahead and fulfill it. But if you don't have a contract, don't enter into it. But it was an interesting one. They weren't saying go elsewhere because Harper's is the only unionized publisher. The other publishers aren't unionized. So they said, so just hold tight. And I asked them, well, will you still offer me a contract when the strike's over? And they said, oh yeah, that'll be about 2 weeks. 5 months later, finally, okay, the strike is over, and we go ahead. So there's been a few that the journey was not just on the trail. The journey also had to do with turning the trail into this.
One of the things I loved was watching the cover here is not actually what the pictures in the book are all pictures from your cell phone, and that's the quality of cell phone pictures these days, or a few childhood pictures you dredged up. But the cover photo was the publisher sent some professional out, and well, tell them where we went and how we did that.
So this is the James River on Chapel Island. So if you know Chapel Island, it's where the Great Shiplock is, down where the James River Association is now building their kind of new Richmond HQ, down near Rockets, along that low line, the capital to capital trail. And when the photographer from Harper's came from Nashville and said, well, give me 3 or 4 places in Richmond, I thought, well, how about one really near where we live that we just went by on the journey? So this is a mile from where we live. And, it's a good photo. If they take 750 of them, one is going to turn out really well. So.
All right, here's a question in the book, or about something in the book. You often talk in the book about going up a big climb on the hike part, I'm going up so many 100 feet. But I had a sense, as I was reading it, even as a hiker, I had a sense that I don't know whether folks really understand what that means and help us think about. So give us an example of one of the points in the book where you have a big climb in front of you, and translate it into something that helps us understand what that means.
Well, I've got fact checkers in the audience. I'm gonna say something, but be corrected if I'm wrong. I think I hiked the trail north to south, and so if you're heading south, I think the biggest climb on the trail is the Priest, which is the Tye River comes down. If you've ever hiked Crabtree Falls, that's the headwaters of the Tye. Then it comes down through this valley in Nelson County. The Appalachian Trail drops down from something called Three Ridges, and then it climbs back up this mountain called the Priest. And I think it's 3,000 feet in a little over 3 miles, John, is that right? Yeah, so 3,000 feet of elevation change in a little over 3 miles. And 3,000 feet would be somewhere between 250 and 300 stories in a building. And it's an intense climb. It's not the steepest climb. There are some shorter ones that are steeper, but this one is just a very long, intense climb. And then to just complete, you get to the Priest Shelter. And the Priest Shelter is one of these shelters on the AT, 3 sides and a metal roof, flat floor. You put your sleeping bag in there. But the Priest Shelter is one of the most famous on the entire 2,200-mile Appalachian Trail, because every shelter has a little journal in it, and you were supposed to write things in the journal, with your trail name. I came through here a few days ago. But in the Priest Shelter, everyone confesses something they've done wrong. So I slept with the shuttle driver, or I tore pages out of the Bible, in the shelter to use to start a fire, or I stole some food out of somebody's pack while they were out walking around. I mean, so the Priest Shelter log is really comical. 2 days before I got to the Priest Shelter, we went through a shelter. I think it's called the Maupin Shelter, maybe. And again, it's 2 days before you get to the Priest Shelter. And I was hiking with some friends from LA, and I told them about this Priest Shelter thing that we might see, but we're at the Maupin Shelter. Ned, is it Maupin?
Well, that's near there.
Yeah, Maupin Field. And we were looking at the shelter log because you always want to see who's been through. And there's an elaborate confession in the shelter log at Maupin, which is not the norm. And somebody is confessing, his confession was fantasies about his fiance's sister. And then he put his trail name, and then he put a print, there's some things you just can't tell a priest. So,
One of the fun things in the book that you'll get lots more feel of when you read it is there really is a community of these people. Not all necessarily even, you may never have run into that person, but there's a communication even across the trail and across the other parts of your trip as well. Well, I've got a couple more questions, but then I'm hoping you all are passing to the left or to the right, whichever it is. Your right, my left.
Before your next one, I'll just say on the community thing, one of my buddies from LA hiked with me with his son and did days on the trail with me and did a third of the river trip with me. But a friend from LA hiked with one of his college-age sons for a couple of days between Rockfish Gap and the Tye River. And as we're coming down from the Three Ridges down toward the Tye, and he's getting ready to fly back to LA, and we woke up in the morning in a shelter like the Harpers Creek shelter, and he's going to end up back in Pacific Palisades by the end of the day. It's kind of head spinning. Charles said, this ain't a trail, this is a community. And I said, well, what do you mean? Well, who built it? Who maintains it? Who are the shuttle drivers? Who lugged the picnic table in 5 miles to get it to the shelter? Who's on the trail that we're meeting? Somebody's just for a day, somebody's doing the whole thing. Who are the people running the B&Bs in town, or the little general stores, or the outdoor outfitters? I mean, this thing, which was conceived in 1921 by a guy named Benton Mackay and completed in 1937, it exists in a physical place, but it is also just this kind of massive community of people who shared pictures, and so some are part of the community who've never set a foot on the trail. I met a guy who had retired from a career with the Utah Department of Wildlife Resources, and there's some nice mountains and trails out there. But his goal in retirement was to hike the Appalachian Trail, and so Boxcar Willie was his name. And he's trudging up the trail one night when I'm about to fall asleep, and he comes in and he says, "I hope you have fuel. Can you make dinner for me? Can you heat up some water for dinner?" But it really is a community. As much as it's a place, it's a community of all of these people who have been a little part of it and continue to be, which Charles grabbed that immediately. He was with me for 2 days. I hadn't had that thought. I'd been hiking for weeks, but he got it immediately.
Well, I'm going to ask you to read one more excerpt. And what I thought I'd ask you to do here is, for a book that's about nature and friendship and family and a heavy dose of politics, there's also a surprising amount of reflection on race and the challenging role that race plays in Virginia's history. And not to belabor the obvious, but can you talk a little bit about why does that come up so much? And can you share an excerpt where you're wrestling with something on that topic?
I started in Harper's Ferry. I mean, so John Brown, his kids, some others, some enslaved people, some freed slaves trying to end slavery. I ended at Fort Monroe, where 20 and odd Africans came in 1619, and then Africans began to self-emancipate in April of 1861. Paddled by plantations, hiked through the Shenandoah National Park, and the history of that park and how it was created. The land was given by Virginia to the federal government for the park, but with the stipulation that everything had to be segregated. You can't write about any of this, and leave race out and say you've written about any of it. You just can't. The Richmond Slave Trail, Manchester slave docks. I mean, I'm on the river, you're going by it. So at every point along the way, if you're really trying to tell the story about the place where you are, then this is the story.
Because that is the story of Virginia.
It's the story of Virginia and America. I mean, in unlikely places, but here's one. This is a day that I'm hiking up near in Amherst County, kind of between Route 60 and the Blue Ridge Parkway. I'm motivated to get back on the trail on a muggy day because I'm about to walk a stretch of the AT that's one of my favorite hikes. 11 or 12 miles from US 60 to a shelter called Punch Bowl near the Blue Ridge Parkway. I've done this stretch a number of times. It's a pretty hike that skirts the edge of a reservoir deep in the Blue Ridge that serves as a source of drinking water for the city of Lynchburg, 25 miles to the southeast of here. The reservoir was created by damming up Brown Mountain Creek, a small tributary of the Pebbler River that snakes through the valleys of Amherst County. And as the trail descends from Route 60 to the creek and then follows it miles downstream to the reservoir, the ghost of an old community comes to life. Enslaved families lived along the creek for decades, and at the close of the Civil War, many of the newly freed people decided to stay. Every few hundred yards, there are stone ruins of cabins or old mills or animal enclosures. A few interpretive signs along the trail describe life in the tiny valley. The sides of the hollow are so steep that it's amazing to think that people could have farmed here. Sunlight would only reach the valley a few hours a day, except in the peak of summer. In the 1920s, the government bought out the families and the land became part of the National Forest and Reservoir. Most of the families relocated down to Buena Vista or other small communities in Amherst. But their ancestors lived for years and gave extensive oral histories about life in this small enclave of free people. Not surprisingly, Old Guide is a Potomac Appalachian Trail Club guide to this trail that was published in 1959 that somebody gave me 60 years later that I carried with me. And I would read what they were saying about this in 1959, and then I was looking at it today. Not surprisingly, Old Guide describes this part of the AT with no reference to the history of slavery. Quote, "There are many stone chimneys and walls to show that once the Blue Ridge Creek valleys were lived in and farmed." Close quote. Even the deepest wilderness in Virginia has profound layers of human history. Like the mostly white families relocated from their mountain ridge homes to create the Shenandoah National Park, these formerly enslaved families had deep roots in this valley stretching back decades when they were forced to leave. It's hard to imagine the heartbreak and anxiety about what new life elsewhere would be like. If we are wise, we don't think about our own accomplishments without thinking about those parents, teachers, coaches, and friends who helped us to a place where achievements were possible. But our own opportunities and experiences are also so often built in spaces, physical and virtual, where others were pushed aside or cleared out and forgotten. We don't think about them much. Brown Mountain Creek exists as a silent reminder I cannot think of a more moving section of trail anywhere.
All right. Whoop. Don't throw the mic away. A little closer.
How many have been at Brown Mountain Creek? I know 2. Okay, well, it's probably, that hike is a 4-mile downhill and a 4-mile back, and it's an amazing hike to do, an amazing hike.
All right, we've got a couple of good questions here. Given your life of significant accomplishments and much sustained effort, how did you give yourself permission to take time off to just walk, ride, and paddle? Great question.
I love that question. So what do senators do on recess? I mean, you know, I never had recess after 6th grade until I got to the United States Senate. We do, the Senate session it's 36 weeks a year, and then it's 16 weeks of recess, and on the recess we travel around the state. And you know, you travel around wearing a suit and in a car, but I thought, well, I can travel around the state by people power. I felt like this is what you do during weekends and recess weeks, but instead of a staff and a schedule and a press announcement and everybody knows when you're coming, just do it and just see who you run into along the way. And so I had the hike, the 42 days was 28 days solo and 14 days with friends and family. The bike trip was a group of guys that I'd done a bike trip with when we were 35 in Iowa, and I was a lot flatter than the Blue Ridge Parkway and the Skyline Drive. So can we still do it? And then the canoe trip, almost always there was somebody in the front of the boat. Ann and my kids, my friends, tribal leaders, the James River Association. But I felt like this is what you do if you're a senator. You travel around the state and you interact with people and you listen to them and you come to know your state better. And after many years of doing it by car with a tie-in, I thought, I think I can do this and grow a deeper connection to the Commonwealth in a different way than I would if I had the big entourage and, you know, was wearing a tie.
And he did ask my permission too.
Yeah. Yeah, the fact that everyone was worried about me except Ann was like, yeah, sure, go ahead. I mean, you know.
All right. In the book, these are some great questions. In the book, you mentioned the climate change challenges that Shenandoah National Park faces. Has the federal government taken action since then that would make a positive change?
That's a great question. And so when we were going through the Shenandoah National Park, we met with the then superintendent, Jennifer Flynn, when we were hiking. And Jennifer talked about the climate change in the Shenandoah National Park is as temperatures warm, species that need cool temperatures to breed, they move 100 feet higher, then 100 feet higher. Then they get where they can't move any higher, and then suddenly they're disappeared. And these are species that might be insects or, you know, some small species, some kinds of plants, but warming temperatures is basically pushing species up and out of the Shenandoah National Park. That was in 2019. I would say we've done 2 things since 2019 that helped. I think it was in maybe 2020 or 2020, it's probably in 2020. We did the Great American Outdoors Act. The Great American Outdoors Act was a bill that was very bipartisan, that was heavy investments into the national parks. There had been huge deferred maintenance and not investments. And so most of these investments were infrastructure improvements, but some could be ways to try to help, you know, resilience investments to keep trails from washing away or things like that. But then the big thing we did was the Inflation Reduction Act. The Inflation Reduction Act that we did in 2022 was sort of divided in 2. Much of it was healthcare, like capping insulin costs and negotiating for prescription drugs under Medicare. But the other piece of it was major investments in clean energy, in, you know, renewables. Virginia, which had been a laggard in wind and solar, with some of these investments is really moving ahead. Just coincidentally, this morning I met someone who came and told me we're going to have a big announcement soon, a big environmental announcement connected to offshore wind, and the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits made that possible. So the only way we're going to, you know, deal with this, I mean, we can make some investments like infrastructure to be more resilient, but the real way to deal with it is to just be a little bit cleaner tomorrow than we are today and just keep adjusting the dial toward low and no carbon energy, incrementally every day get better and better and better, and then that will slow down the trend that you see in the Shenandoah or some of the trends affecting the James.
All right, next one. What was your most perilous experience during your travels? Walk, ride, paddle.
I'm absolutely horrified by spiders. And it's not a good thing to do these trips, especially the hike, if you're afraid of spiders. So that was not, petrifying, but I always had to kind of fight down my gag reflex. And spiders like to weave webs across the trail. And if you're walking first thing in the morning, I almost picked the name Spider Face rather than Dog Bowl because you're just breaking the spider webs with your face. I only had one really bad incident on the trail, and at least one person in the room was with me. I'm carrying a jet. Anybody know what a jet boil stove is? Tiny stove that can boil 1.5 liters water in 90 seconds, and that's for morning coffee and oatmeal. So we were canoeing, 4 of us from the neighborhood up near Powhatan State Park. We'd had a really nice couple of days, and I'm making coffee and shooting the breeze, and I didn't snap the lid onto the stove tight. So then when I'm pouring, and I'm wearing a crock, and when I'm pouring the coffee out and the lid falls off, and 1.5 liters of boiling water on top of this, rubber river crock I have on. And I screamed like an animal. And then I did something that was very painful, which is I just suddenly thought, what if that rubber melts to my foot? So I reached down and ripped the crock off, which was horrible. Then I told my friends, well, I'm going to make another 1.5 liters of coffee, and in a half hour or so I'll be ready. And they're like looking at me like, you ain't going anywhere. But they didn't say that. This is what friends do. They let you figure it out. And then I'm making the coffee, and then the shock is wearing off, and then the pain is getting really intense, and then I don't think I can canoe today. And my friend said, no, we knew that immediately. you sit down and drink your coffee. We'll take down the whole, camp, take down everything. And I explained this in the book. The friends who accompanied me, they have fun in the outdoors too, just like me. But I didn't realize until that day, the river trip was the 3rd of the 3. I didn't realize until that day that my friends were not only accompanying me because they like being outdoors. By now, they were very invested in, you're going to finish this thing. And it was like when I told them I was doing it, they probably thought it was kind of stupid or like I would quit. But by now that I'm in the 3rd part of the journey and I'm 2/3 of the way done, they're like, no, we're taking your gear down, we're going to unpack it, we're going to take your canoe off, and then we're going to come sit on the porch and plan out the next set of the trip with you. So the worst moment of the trip actually gave me an understanding of my friends were coming along not just because they were having a good time, that they had decided they were going to be guardian angels around getting this trip done.
And we've been blessed. You've been blessed. We've been blessed with some very special friends. I'm just going to keep going until they tell me not to. This one I'm having a little trouble reading at the end, but I think it is. Were there some people who did not know you after spending time with you, and how was that? Did you like getting off the grid?
Yeah, oh my gosh, did I ever. Did I ever. Yeah, most people, probably maybe a quarter of people knew me and said something to me, and then maybe another quarter figured out who I was, but hey, you're out on the trail and you're using a trail name, so this, we're not talking about politics, we're talking about the trail. But I bet half of the people had no idea who I was. And I had some comical interactions. Once I was hiking, I'll tell you two, one comical and one like amazing coincidence, although I don't believe in coincidences. The comical one. I'm hiking, I get to a shelter and Magic Tracker and Underdog are there. And I'm visiting with them. And in this phase, I'm still TK. I wasn't Dog Bowl yet, but we're just shooting the breeze about this and that. And then somebody comes in and says, Senator Kaine, what are you doing here? And these 3 guys goes, what do you mean, Senator Kaine? Well, and the guy goes, no, this is one of our senators. He was on the ticket with Hillary. And they look and they go, well, wait, where's your security detail? And I said, hey, they blend in pretty well. And they stepped out of the shelter and they were sure they were going to see like camouflaged people maneuvering around. The one that was kind of an amazing coincidence / non-coincidence, I'm hiking by myself one day in a place called the Roller Coaster, which is a part of the northern Shenandoah Valley, with just steep, short climbs, drop, steep, climb, drop, climb, drop. And I'm coming up a climb, and I can hear people coming down, and it's a group of men here by their voices, and as they get a little closer, they're speaking Arabic. And I'm like, well, this is interesting. So, and it's kind of switchbacking a little bit, so I'm getting closer, they're getting closer. We round a bend, there's about 6 guys all hiking together. They hike right by me, and then the last guy says, hey, Senator Kaine. I said, yeah, tell me who you guys are. And the guy goes, we have been working with your office for the last 6 months. My mother has been in she's a Syrian, and she's been in a refugee camp in Jordan because of the Muslim travel ban. She can't come into the United States. And just yesterday, your staff called and told me we have permission for her finally to come to the United States.
And tell them who the group was, because this is...
Oh, yeah. So I was like, I can't believe it. He goes, oh, man, my mom is going to make you the best meal you've ever had in your life. and I said, and they had been working with one of my staffers, and the real good work gets done by the staff. But I hadn't done this. My staff had done it. But he wanted to thank me, and now he's going to thank me in person in less than 24 hours. And I said, well, what's your guys' story? Oh, we're a Syrian-American dentist hiking club. And he's like, I mean, okay, Syrian-American dentist hiking club.
So I've got a last question I want to ask, but do I have time for 2 more?
And I got one for you, too. So.
Okay. And then maybe 3 more. Okay. Can you tell a bike story?
Let's see. Well, that's a Rorschach, so what's the first thing that comes to mind? The best downhill on the planet Earth. So the Blue Ridge Parkway, has some steep ups and downs, and we were going south to north. The hardest climb was from Roanoke to Peaks of Otter. It's about a 35-mile climb, but it has a couple of 12-mile climbs and a little bit of up and down, then another 12-mile climb. But when you leave Peaks of Otter going north, you climb for about 3 or 4 miles to something, I think it might be called Apple Orchard or Crab Apple Orchard Mountain. And it's the highest mountain. If you're hiking north on the Appalachian Trail, you don't get that high again until you get into Vermont. So it's a pretty high mountain. The Blue Ridge Parkway comes right by there. It's very near the trail at the AT at that point. And then you start this downhill. It's a 13-mile downhill to the James River. The Blue Ridge Parkway crosses the James River. And it is truly, truly frightening. I mean, it's better than climbing, but it is frightening. I mean, you start to go, and then you're going faster, and then there's curves, and then you're starting to think, what if there's just a twig I run over? I mean, I could completely wipe out. So, you're kind of then really leaning on the brakes. You start to see your speedometer getting up over 40, and then 45, and then you really lean it back. But that was a really, really fun trip on the bike trip. So yeah, climb to Peaks of Otter and then down to the James River. And that piece is the only place where the 3 trips really combine, because the Appalachian Trail crosses the James River on something called the Footbridge, which is a footbridge, but it's actually named after a guy named Charles Foote. The AT comes over the footbridge. The AT comes over the James on the footbridge, and it's within a half a mile that the Blue Ridge Parkway comes over the James. So that is the only place where the 3 trips, the hike and the bike trip and the paddling trip, were essentially in the same spot. But yeah, that's some good bike
We
stuff.
haven't talked much about the paddle trip, but you have to read the book for that, because we're going to move on. My final
I'd say the
question.
paddle one was the most surprising.
So my final question is this. We've had a lot of great memories here at the Library of Virginia, this very special place, and many literary memories here. So what's a favorite literary moment you connect with the wonderful Library of Virginia?
I'm going to answer that, but then your question that you have to answer is, what was your favorite day with me? Because you did the hike, and you did some of the hike and some of the paddle. So you think about that. Library of Virginia, we've had a lot of fun here. When I finished being governor, every governor gets a portrait painted, And I asked for my portrait to be painted on the James River. So I'm standing next to what is the James in the background, and the unveiling was done here. Bernie is part of my administration, and others who are here have been part of it, and we had the unveiling right here, which was really memorable. But the most have been, Carol, the book awards that are done is it October of every year? Yeah. So the Library of Virginia does these great book awards where, the fiction award, the nonfiction award, the children's literature, the poetry award, and the Weinstein family has been so gracious. But my favorite one was, Adri Trigiani is always the MC, and she's absolutely fantastic. But I think the favorite one was, the Lifetime Achievement Award was being given to Tom Wolfe and Richmonder, and I was governor then, and so they asked if I would introduce Tom Wolfe, and I love Tom Wolfe's novels, and just the chance to meet him and then hear him talk, it was really amazing. The other one, Lifetime Achievement Award recently, was given to Barbara Kingsolver, and that was also really special, having a chance to meet her. It was before Demon Copperhead was published. But to hear, it was about to be published, and to hear her talk about, like Poisonwood Bible or Animal, Vegetable, Miracle, other books of hers were really, really fun, and it was wonderful to meet her. So I'd say the book event here, which if you haven't come to it, you should really do it. It's a magical evening. All right, so
I do get the last word.
Yeah.
So many good moments, but I think easy to say a favorite was the canoeing stretch that you and I did. When you're canoeing, it helps, not always, but almost always, you had somebody in the boat with you.
Yeah. And
so you and I in one boat together, and our daughter Anella and her friend Fern from New York, who'd never spent any time in Virginia, did an upper piece of the James, and then coming into Buchanan, which is not the same as Buchanan County, right?
Yeah.
And there's this wonderful outfitters based in Buchanan, Twin Rivers Outfitters, and they have created glamping outposts along the river about a day apart. And they were tents, but they were very comfortable tents. One could stand up, and there were bunks and such. And so one night we were in one of the glamping tent sites, care of the Twin River Outfitters, and sitting out by the campfire playing music. And there was this group of young think tank types who working in DC, who came over and joined us and merged their liquor in with our liquor, and their voices in with our voices. And I know at least you had your harmonica. I don't think Anella had I don't think we had any other instruments with us, but we had some beautiful voices singing around the campfire. Hard to beat.
Yeah, that was a very good night.
All right. And with that, we'll thank
all
of
you guys so
and
much
we'll
for
send
coming.
Tim out to sign some books.
Yeah.